Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Erin. I'm the associate curator here at the Hammer Museum, and thank you all for coming tonight to Ulysses Jenkins' History of a Video Griot. As we all know, tonight is extra special because the video griot is in the house and will be doing a talk back with us, Ulysses Jenkins. Peace signs. And yeah, we are really excited to really dive into the history, the archive, the origin stories of Ulysses, and really give you all a background. For those who don't know, this program is associated with Ulysses Jenkins Without Your Interpretation, which is currently on view upstairs until May 16th. And it is Ulysses's first solo museum show ever. And the show covers over 50 years of his art career. Many know Ulysses as a video and performance artist. He is often known as the first Black video artist. And tonight we're going to get into some other details, his painting history, a history around muralism, and also a really seminal and groundbreaking show that happened at the Getty called California Video. So how tonight will work is I will be speaking a bit about one of Ulysses's themes that often comes up in his work. Bridget Cooks will be speaking about Ulysses's time at Southern University, which is where he got his BA, and him coming back to Los Angeles. And then Glenn Phillips from the Getty will be speaking about California Video, the groundbreaking video show that I think really provided a scholarship and a history around the origin story of experimental video here in Los Angeles. And then after that, we will have a talk back with Ulysses. I want to thank our partners tonight, the Getty Research Institute. The Getty Research Institute not only really collaborated to bring this night together, but they also really helped us republish Ulysses's memoir. In the early 90s, Ulysses wrote a memoir, and it was something that my co-curator and I, Meg, only found in his studio. And it really became a blueprint for us in terms of putting these exhibition timelines and histories together. So that is now republished thanks to the GRI, and you can find that in our bookstore alongside the catalog. I'd also like to thank Pamela Joyner, one of the major funders of the show, who's here tonight. Thank you, Pamela. And lastly, I'd love to thank our public programs team. They are small but mighty, and they are putting together exceptional programs post COVID. And I'm grateful for them, so thank you. Thanks. So I'm just going to quickly read Bridget and Glenn's bios because we have to get that out of the way. And then Bridget will come up and start us off. Bridget R. Cooks is Associate Professor of Art History and African American Studies at the University of California, Irvine. Her research focuses on African American artists, Black visual culture, and museum criticism. Cooks has worked in museum education and has curated several exhibitions, including Grafton Tyler Brown, Exploring California, Pasadena Museum of California Art, Ernie Barnes, a retrospective at the California African American Museum, and the nationally touring exhibition, The Black Index. She is author of the book. I love it. We got a clappy crowd tonight. Okay. She is author of the book Exhibiting Blackness, African Americans in the American Art Museum. If you have not read that book, please do yourself the biggest favor. And some of her other publications can be found in After All, After Image, American Studies, Aperture, and American Quarterly. Glenn Phillips is Senior Curator, Head of Exhibitions, and Head of Modern and Contemporary Collections at the Getty Research Institute. Phillips was a core member of the organizational team for Pacific Standard Time Art in LA, 1945 to 1980, co-directed the Pacific Standard Time Performance and Public Art Festival, and co-curated It Happened at Pomona, Art at the Edge of Los Angeles, 1969 to 73. His other curatorial projects include Radical Communication, Japanese Video Art from 1968 to 88, Yvonne Rainer Dances and Films, 2014, Video Art in Latin America, 2017, Harold Seisman Museum of Obsessions, 2018, and Blondell Cummings, Dances Moving Pictures, 2021. At present, Phillips is co-curating an autobiographical exhibition of Barbara T. Smith that will open at the GRI in February of 2023. So thank you all, and I'll welcome up Bridget Cooks.
All right, thank you. Thanks to whoever my one fan was. I don't know who that was who was like, it's all about the Black Index, but I appreciate that. I'm delighted to be here. All thanks first to Ulysses for his work. Right? I mean, I'm very artist-centered. I wouldn't have a job if it wasn't for artists, so I'm really appreciative. To Erin Christovale and Meg Only, who I have such deep appreciation and admiration for the gift of this exhibition, and to Claudia Bestor and Carla Aguiniga for handling the details of this event. So I've had the pleasure of working with Ulysses as my colleague in the Department of African American Studies for the last 16 years. I know. And I was at his job talk in the 90s when I was a student there. So it's wonderful to have this background from which to speak about his work. So I'm also speaking to you this evening as a member of the African American Art History Initiative, a group that I'm honored, truly honored. It's a life-changing experience to be part of this group at the Getty Research Institute. And in that position, I, along with my colleague Amanda Tweez at the UC Berkeley Oral History Center, have had the honor of conducting oral histories with many African American artists, including Ulysses. So what I'm going to do tonight is just provide some context for the work that we see in the exhibition, Ulysses Jenkins, Without Your Interpretation, that has been documented in his oral history. So Ulysses is a native Angelino with Southern roots. An experience that so many African Americans in the city share because of the westward migration of African Americans during World War II. This migration has been elucidated by art historian and curator Dr. Kelly Jones in her book titled South of Pico, African American Artists in Los Angeles in the 1960s and 1970s, in which she connects the stories of migration for employment within a larger struggle for a space of liberation, escape from racist constriction, and the possibility of creative freedom. It is easy to see that Ulysses was destined to fulfill these hopes as an experimental and collaborative artist based in Los Angeles, who explored southern, northern, and tropic roots, R-O-U-T-S, as well as R-O-O-T-S, as part of his process. And I guess I'll just say, I mean, the subtext, and this is very selfish and personal, is I'm also a native Angelina with, with Southern roots. So I've always felt this sense of camaraderie with Ulysses and his story because it overlaps with mine, but many, thousands of other African Americans in Los Angeles. And so that's one of the reasons why we're grateful to him for being an artist. As a youth, he was aware of the color line in LA. He grew up in an integrating Los Angeles and had experiences living in a Black neighborhood near La Cienega and Jefferson, and attended a predominantly Black elementary school while he was there. However, his family moved to the West Side, where he attended predominantly white schools as well. And so this geographic shift exposed him to different cultures and types of personalities at a young age. He knew that there were neighborhoods where he shouldn't go, like Culver City, near Desilu Studios, right? If he wanted to stay out of trouble, at least that the kind of trouble that was racial trouble that comes with being in the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time. And on the West Side, he had experiences so common for African Americans who become friends with people who are not Black at school, right? And you learn very quickly that Blackness is not welcomed in white homes for fear of racial mixing. He was exposed to people of different nationalities early on in the city, particularly Jewish and Japanese Americans. And we see his willingness to befriend and later to collaborate across racial lines as integral to his practice in mural paintings, in performance and video. And I want to just point out this section from Erin and Meg's organization of the show called Multicultural Ideal, question mark, right? And so this is a point where we see him, we see you coming from your background and then trying to sort out how can we work together in a multicultural way. And I think for me personally, walking through the show, I was really able to see how, Ulysses, you're an example of how that can be done. And one of the great things about the show is that it's brought out so much work that people haven't seen in many, many years, or just a few people have seen. And it gives us some ideas to get through this kind of racial trauma that I think we're still all absolutely experiencing. Ulysses was talented early on. He had artistic talent in drawing, particularly encouraged by his mother, who was also a creative person. He also had the ability to sing. I don't know if you're planning on singing tonight, but he sang a few times during the oral history to Amanda and I. He was also naturally athletic. He played baseball, football, and he also ran track in high school. And I think that this really gave him, and you will have your chance to speak, but I feel like based on our conversations, it really gave you a confidence to perform. And I think it also drew people to Ulysses who were attracted to his talent and what he could do. By the time he graduated from from Hamilton High School, he knew he wanted to be an art major. And at one point in the oral history, Ulysses explained wanting to have creative freedom. I'm just going to read an excerpt from the oral history where he says, "I thought I wanted to be a commercial artist. And so I was taking these classes that would teach you how to make posters and things that would allow you to get into the art world as a commercial artist. But I had this one teacher who really defined my art direction, who was the teacher of the commercial arts class. She'd be all on my case about what to draw, how to draw, when to draw, and all that stuff. And I came to the conclusion, I said, if this is what it means to be in the commercial arts, I don't need somebody like a slave driver on my case. I want to be free." I thought being an artist was being a free individual, and the notion of freedom was what I was searching for in my search of art discipline. That's actually how I discovered the notion of fine arts. In 1964, Ulysses enrolled in Southern University, a historically Black university in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, as the place to study art. He had family members on his mother's side who had attended Southern, and being in a Black college environment appealed to him. His education first began on the train ride to Louisiana, where he realized how West Coast he really was when it came to his sense of self and how that conflicted with the way that he was perceived by others. And then after he got to Southern, there was more out of the classroom education in terms of thinking through race, colorism, class, and also a sense of dress and style. At Southern, he met Black professors, art historians, and abstract artists, and you'll have to read in more detail about this, the oral history. He gives really great information about some of these influences. And he also began exploring art in multimedia, and I'm going to show you some of his untitled works here. So this is his first oil painting, and Meg and Erin have included this in the exhibition and titled work from 1966 to 1967. A figurative relief wood sculpture, and these are all taken from slides that were found in his personal archive. A sculpture in the round of a true soul sister in the late 1960s. A large abstract painting, and 2 lithographs, one from 1968 called Driftwood, and another composition number 1 from 1969. And so while Ulysses was developing as an artist, he was also engaged in activism. And I mention this because I want us to keep thinking about the exhibition and how we can look at these roots, part of his early journey, and how we end up with the magnificent production and experimental work today. So this is a photograph that's in the exhibition in the opening room from 1967 of a student demonstration after a campus visit to Southern University by Stokely Carmichael and H. Rap Brown. And you see Ulysses on the left with his UC Berkeley shirt on, being all California in the South. And I'm just going to read the text in the poster that's held by the man in the center. It says, "Protest is an important part of education. It means you have observed and evaluated and have found a situation that needs changing and are taking steps to bring about that change." The campus police attacked and wounded students who participated in this demonstration. And the night after their visit, the Klan came to campus and burned a cross. So this is just part of the context that I just want us to keep in mind. So here at Southern, Ulysses learned more about Black people, his history, cultural history. He learned about art, art making, and the world. And I think that this was part of his foundation that set a path for the art that he created upon returning to Los Angeles after graduating from Southern in 1969. Ulysses worked as a display artist at the May Company on Crenshaw and Santa Barbara Boulevard. The work required him to work on physically work on scaffolding to create his department store installations. He also worked in the juvenile correction system with LA Youth, and he made sets for theatrical performances, plays that he helped cultivate with the students. And these experiences are some that led to his work as a muralist, right? Having that experience making sets and having experience working in large format and on scaffolding. Outside of work, he began using himself in his art, noted in this pivotal painting, self-portrait from 1970-ish, okay? This is, and correct me wrong if I'm wrong, Ulysses, please. This is the only painting in which he shows himself nude as a visual metaphor for the naked truth. And this nudity later becomes a regular feature of his practice and performance in video. Ulysses was still dedicated to being an artist, and he started to look for work as an artist in Los Angeles. He went to the Watts Tower Art Center, where he met then director and legendary artist John Outerbridge. Outerbridge didn't have work for Ulysses, but he directed him to Barnsdall Park and legendary director and curator Josine Ianco-Starles at the Municipal Art Gallery. She hired Ulysses as an art preparator, and that helped establish his footing in the LA art scene. She was working, the way that the stars align in this story to me is really incredible. She was working on a retrospective of an artist named Charles White, an artist that Ulysses had admired since he learned about his work when he was a student and undergraduate at Southern. Outerbridge introduced him to the Black art community, and Ulysses started going to Alonzo and Dale Davis's Brockman Gallery. Around 1972, Ulysses moved to Venice Beach, where he became part of an art hippie community and lived on the boardwalk. And here's where he painted his first mural titled Rat Trap on a head shop on Rose Avenue and Oceanfront Walk, and he began to make his name as a muralist of the city. Rat Trap is a psychedelically influenced, which means LSD was involved, a psychedelically influenced painting that shows the city of LA on a rat trap and Angelenos as being trapped in a polluted city. Hovering across the top of the composition is smog and skulls, and a freeway moves across the painting. The double yellow lines of the black road on the right of the painting rear up into two snakes. Nude figures standing on the left side of the painting support the freeway from beneath. And in the foreground is a field of marijuana plants. This painting made him, this is a term my friends and I use, local famous in LA. And it also encouraged him to continue working as a muralist. The last work that I'll show from this early period is the mural Transportation Brought Art to the People from 1976 at the Department of Motor Vehicles, the DMV, on Hope Street in downtown LA. And this project was the result of Ulysses winning a competition offered by the DMV for best mural design that told the story of transportation. And Ulysses' design focused on the people of color that came to California. So at the center of this composition, we see a redwood tree with a tunnel carved in the middle and a man driving a Model T Ford driving through the base. A train moves across a bridge in the center of the work. To the right of the tree is a black man standing with a bundle on his head representing the burden he had on his mind and in his life. There is a Chinese man at the bottom of the painting to represent the Chinese contributions to building the railroad. A stagecoach references the role of the Postal Service with transportation. And there's a Mexican man with a child in his back walking to get into California. So I will stop here. And again, you really have to read or listen to the oral history or watch the oral history to really get some of the details that I'm very aware that I'm skipping just for the sake of time. But I'd like to stop with this picture because I love it. This is Ulysses working in 1976. And before I transition out, or part of my transition off of the stage, I think of Ulysses as helping to create a multicultural vision of Los Angeles in public art. And that's just huge, and we don't have a whole lot of models for that. So it's really wonderful to honor Ulysses in this way and pay attention to part of the legacy that he's left. And he developed this multicultural vision of Los Angeles through the performances and the video and the television work that we see represented in Erin and Meg's incredible exhibition in the gallery. So thank you to Ulysses, and thanks everybody.
Thank you, Bridget. Also, that mural, I'm going to actually go back to it, is still on that building. It is his last surviving mural. It's on the 101 near like MLK and Expo at the old DMV building. So if you're ever on the freeway, it's literally right there next to you. It's pretty amazing. Highly recommend it. Okay. Notes on a Doggerel archive. So I'll admit it was really hard for me to choose what aspect, what themes, what techniques to really pull out for this talk. I feel like I've learned so much about Ulysses and his work over the past 4 years. But literally at 2 in the morning, I woke up in the middle of the night and I was like, the image problem, like a dork. Um, and so I'm going to get into this notion of the image problem. And the image problem is this idea that comes up in a lot of Ulysses's earlier video and performance work, and I think marks a chapter, so to speak, of his practice. So, so we'll start with remnants of the Watts Festival. And actually, before that, I should give you a little backstory about Ulysses's education at the time. So, as Bridget mentioned, Ulysses went to Southern University in Louisiana in the late 60s. He graduated in 1969 and he came back to LA. Between his time of Southern and then eventually going to Otis, he had a short stint at Santa Monica City College. And one of the classes that he took there was a Black American cinema class. And this was really formative to him, and you really see it sort of come through in his earlier work. In that class, they were studying films like Oscar Michaud films, they were studying Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song, and they were kind of running the gamut from early films to the Blaxploitation era. And I think in that class, Ulysses really starts to understand and get a better sense of the history of American cinema, of Hollywood, and specifically of the stereotypes and caricatures that Black people were often made to perform. And so, coming out of that class, he makes a few video works and he starts to note that within mass media and within cinema, there is a serious image problem, especially when it comes to the Black image. In several of his earlier works, you see sort of two ways that he's addressing that, two strategies. One is this very sort of tension filled back and forth with a literal objectification of this image problem. And the other actually is by making these very verite documentary style works in which he's really trying to show. I think he's trying to show Black excellence. He's trying to show the realness of everyday Black life in Los Angeles. And he's also trying to highlight Black figures at the time that were really important to him. Being that we're coming out of the 1960s, we're seeing that shift from the civil rights movement to the Black Power movement. And what I think is really fascinating about Ulysses and typical of him as an artist is he's not necessarily looking at the political figures of the time, say a Martin Luther King, but he's really invested in people like Jimi Hendrix, in people like James Brown, and in people like Charles White. And so you see them all sort of surface in these early video works. So, Remnants of the Watts Festival is actually the first video that Ulysses ever did in 1972. And this is a really interesting story because, actually, in an interesting way, piggybacking off of Bridget's, talking about his early stint in muralism. As she mentioned, Ulysses moved to Venice. He was really inspired by a group of muralists called the LA Fine Art Squad. And he moves to Venice. He starts making his own murals. He's on the boardwalk and he meets a dear friend, Michael Zingali, who's a fellow muralist. One day, Michael approaches Ulysses and he says, "Hey, these guys are renting out their Sony Porter Pack. We should see what this video thing is all about." And, Ulysses was reluctant at first, but then eventually he got what he refers to as the Video Jones. And so him and Michael actually form a video collective called Video Venice News. And it's one of many collectives and sort of collaborations that Ulysses is in throughout his lifetime. And Video Venice News is this really sort of guerrilla street style media, but also this like verite documentary crew whose goal is really to, document the people in their everyday life as a way to push against sort of mainstream media's ideas of certain communities and specifically of certain cultures. And so one of their first video works that they do is Remnants of the Watts Festival. And I wanted to also note the timeline for this piece because it says it was made in 72, 73, but wasn't compiled until 1980. And sometimes you'll see those discrepancies in his work, and it literally actually comes down to resources, not necessarily having the ability to edit those works yet, but doing them at a later time. So this work is really incredible. It's a long form documentary. Ulysses talks about him and Michael and other people within the collective literally showing up to the Watts Arts Festival with cameras in hand, mics in hand. And what's fascinating is people respond to them as if they are the media. And so they immediately want to be interviewed. There's this sort of swarm around them, and they sort of get into it. What's really important to know, I think, historically, was that in 1965, there was a major uprising in Watts, Los Angeles, in which, several Black people were harmed. The police were involved. And so this is 1972, somewhat a few years later, in which the mainstream media is still telling people do not go to Watts. It's a violent place. And obviously, at this time, Watts is predominantly Black. Still is, I hope. um, and so Ulysses, it clearly thinks that there's something wrong with that depiction and that narrative and knowing that community. And so this is really the intention behind him and that collective going to document this very rich and very vibrant festival. Throughout the documentary, he interviews several people like Cecil Ferguson, who was one of the organizers of the festival for many years, several artists. Ulysses's work, his nude portrait, is actually in this documentary, in that show. And he also documents, these incredible musical acts like War. And it's just a really beautiful depiction of Watts. And so I think this is sort of the first attempt to combat the quote unquote image problem. So then we go to Momentous Occasions, the Spirit of Charles White. Now, this is another documentary style video work in which Ulysses documents Charles White, um, obviously, extremely important artist, but also extremely important to Ulysses. So, when Ulysses got back from Southern and he knew he wanted to continue his artistic career, he wanted to get his MFA and he was really set on going to UCLA. He submitted his proposal and was rejected. And in this sort of kismet moment, he connects with Gary Lloyd, really important artist, sculptor at the time that was at UCLA and also at Otis. And Gary's like, hey, let me look at your work. And so Ulysses starts showing him his paintings, and he's like, you should go to Otis. You should meet Charles White. He'll be a great mentor to you. And eventually, obviously, Ulysses goes to Otis. Charles White becomes extremely important to him. And he has this incredible mentor for those 2 years that he's in school. And Charles White actually passes the year that Ulysses graduates. But there's a lot of really beautiful things in this documentary. For example, on the bottom right there, that's a young Betty Saar being interviewed. Obviously, we see Charles White at the front with some of his notable works. And then there's also these really great moments in which Charles is just teaching, and you see the gravitas, you see the energy, and you see the way his students are responding to him. And these aren't just Black students, these are all students. Ulysses was one of 4 Black students at Otis at the time, and they all really surrounded Charles White as a mentor, a protector, and, someone to essentially inspire them. So, again, this sort of combating of the image problem in a very soft and loving way, cherishing a mentor that he loved, and pointing to not only that, but this is actually documentation of a really important exhibition that he did that Bridget actually brought up at the LA Municipal Art Gallery. This was his retrospective. So, just great LA history, also. From there, we go to massive images, and this is when we get kind of crazy. Massive images, I think, is a really important work because I think in a lot of ways it marks Ulysses's first inroads at thinking more conceptually about his video practice. This was actually a work that he made that he submitted to get into Otis. It was one of the first video works of the type that he did at that time. And as I mentioned before, Ulysses was at Santa Monica City College taking this class on Black American cinema. And you see this direct correlation come up in this work. As you can see here, there are flashes throughout the video of these caricatures and stereotypes. We have Hattie McDaniel up at the top. We have Burt Williams in blackface playing a minstrel. In I believe the tap dancer, and all throughout these sort of media flashes of all of these figures, of the mammy figure, of the Sambo figure, we see our sort of hero Ulysses kind of stuck in a pinch. And in this work, Ulysses is in the top left and bottom right here. And he is outfitted in a robe. He has a sledgehammer. He has a scarf that is the American flag. And he's wearing this really bizarre, almost milk carton over his face with sunglasses. And he has a chant that he's saying when the work starts. And the thing is, he is covered, as you can see, he's sort of surrounded by this tower of monitors. And he goes, "You're just a mass of images I've gotten to know from years and years of TV shows. The hurting thing, the hidden pain." Ulysses? I won't and I don't relate, but for some, it's too late. So you have your hero here sort of giving you this message, this very crude message. And what it really comes down to is, throughout this video and throughout this imagery of this minstrelsy, you see Ulysses attempting to destroy these monitors. And at the very end of this video, he has his sledgehammer up. He's about to destroy them, but he can't actually bring himself to do it. And then he looks at the camera. And so he's essentially looking at you. And so it's this very ominous ending. Another thing is he is in a wheelchair. And so there's some sort of implication that, he is handicapped in a sense by these images, by this societal depictions of these images of Blackness. And he can't bring himself to destroy them because they have been so overwhelming. And so I think this is where we start to into more of the sort of tensioned approach at the Black image problem. He's literally attempting to destroy mass media, television, but society can't allow him to do so in this work. Yeah, I think this work is really amazing. Two-zone transfer. So, two-zone transfer was in 1979, and so this was actually his last year at Otis. And during this time, as I mentioned before, he was one of 4 Black students at Otis. The other 3 students were Ronnie Nichols, Greg Pitts, and a little known painter, Kerry James Marshall. And they all formed a very fast bond, being connected, also, all sort of being mentored by Charles White. And, they experienced a lot while on that campus. Ulysses recounts a time in which a fellow student was walking past them and said, "Well, look at the black crows." And, I think what was really beautiful about those moments is Charles White would essentially tell them, don't do anything to them. Show them what you can do, show them your work. And that's your power. And so that sort of inspiration leads you into this piece, Two Zone Transfer. And I want to quickly read one fascinating thing about Ulysses's archive is he wrote treatments for every single video that he did, and they're beautifully poetic and layered. And so I'll just read a short clip from Two Zone Transfer. The main character, having a restless night, has a dream which leads his subconscious into the history of the minstrel, an American entertainment institution, from which the stereotypical image of Black people derived. The dreamer encounters Greg Pitts, Kerry James Marshall, Ronnie Nichols, all portrayed as white minstrels, putting on blackface over Ford and Nixon masks, the masks representing exploitation. He questions them, and they point out that the Black image has not been accepted as aesthetically pleasing here in the United States and abroad. This is because of the white minstrel's exaggeration, misrepresentation, and misuse of the Black image. And so, again, this image problem that he is contending with here. And I think what's fascinating about this work is it's very much inspired by a childhood story from Ulysses. When he was about 16, he went to his first concert, which was James Brown. It's kind of amazing, at the Palladium. And, he put on his little suit and tie. I think his mom dropped him off with some friends. And he was so overtaken by James Brown's presence, but also more specifically how women responded to him. And so this really made him think about, because there was a conversation happening during that time about Elvis, and Elvis being the greatest rock star of all time. And Ulysses was like, well, we know that's not true. So so in this work, he embodies James Brown. This is really great performance scene where he's dancing and performing, and the minstrels are sort of dancing behind him. As you can see here, in another moment, he turns into a Black preacher. And this is all in a sort of fever dream that his character goes into. He later wakes up at the very end of the video and says, I know it has to be done. And then it cuts off. So again, this sort of ominous ending of like, wait, tell us what's happening. Um, and I think this is it's just a really great sort of symbolic piece in which these minstrels at some points are sort of like cheering him on, at other points are sort of dragging him down. And so again, these sort of white minstrels keep pulling and tugging at the Black image, at the Black representation of culture. And he represents certain facets of Black culture, from the church to the musician, etc. And then finally, just another rendering of the same old problem. So this was Ulysses's final work at Otis before he graduated, and it was just a performance. So these are actually really incredible performance documentation that was taken by Nancy Buchanan, who I think is here tonight. Shout out to Nancy. And I love moments like that because I feel like, if you look at any of the photo sort of labels in Ulysses's work, there's so many incredible LA artists who have collaborated with each other over the years and shared their work and made their work possible. This was Ulysses's final work at Otis, and Ulysses was in the intermedia department, which no longer exists, but at the time was really sort of an experimental, multidisciplinary department in which he really, I think, got to explore video and performance in all of these different ways. As I mentioned before, he was taught by Charles White and Betty Saar, but also Chris Burden and Carl Chang and Gene Youngblood. And so you see all of these influences showing up in this work in particular. So I will read a quick part of the notes that he wrote for this piece. Taking that which is and making is not, showing that which was and making it no more. For sophisticated manipulations, so smooth, so quick, so slick. For naive acceptance and the tricks, the grand illusions, misread, again, honest perceptions, detour instead, so many, so needed, too much for the head, and not true revelation, an image, an object, better off dead. So, this performance is quite the trip because, first off, Ulysses' mom is sitting in the front row. And he called her up and told her to come. And she was like, "Well, what are you doing?" He's like, "I can't tell you. You just got to be there." So I wanted to point out something really interesting about this work, which is so obviously, as you can see here, Ulysses, in the very beginning of this work, is wearing a janitor's outfit. And this was done in the Otis galleries. And as you can see here, this table and this monitor and this dildo are all set up at the very front of the gallery. But when people were filing in to sit down, Ulysses was nowhere to be found. And so everyone's really confused looking around. Meanwhile, there's a janitor in the back of the room just kind of doing his thing. Obviously, Ulysses then comes up to reveal himself, takes off his janitor costume, and he's got on his nipple pasties and his short shorts. Um, and you see this incredible sort of cinematic standoff between him and the dildo in blackface. On top of that, the monitor that you see in the back is producing a live feed of the whole showdown. And so eventually Ulysses finally shoots it and it quote unquote dies. So he finally conquers the image problem. And what's really interesting about this work too is there's also some sort of personal history, which was Ulysses actually applied to be a janitor in 1969 as soon as he got back to LA at a local gallery, and he talks about how, you know, people the gallery people really detested that because he was trying to be an artist too, and how dare him, you know, he's a janitor, why would he try and be an artist? And so you see that sort of very personal story come in, but also again he's thinking about these stereotypes specifically around Black masculinity and this sort of back and forth between being in a sort of mode of servitude or being hypersexualized. And so he's playing both of these roles out as he's battling this dildo. Um, I think this piece is so genius. And I love that while this is a performance piece, he still manages to bring the video and the monitor and that sort of representation of media into the space as the standoff takes place. And hopefully he finally kind of kills the image problem. So, yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Wow, these talks have been amazing. It's really great to be here, and also just want to echo congratulations on the show, Ulysses. It's amazing. It makes me so happy. to see it. It's so well done, and it's a joy. So I'm going to talk about massive images also, which was included in this exhibition at the Getty Museum in 2008 called California Video. And I'm going to talk about that show, sort of three little mini revelations I had while working on that show. And two of them came from Ulysses. So we're going to start by watching just a couple minutes of that video.
You're just a mass of images you've gotten to know. From years and years of TV shows. You're just a mass of images you've gotten to know. From years and years of TV shows. The hurting thing, the hidden pain, was written and bitten into your veins. I won't, and I don't relate. But to some, I think it's too late. You're just a mass of images you've gotten to know from years and years of TV shows. The hurt and pain, the hurt and pain. Was written and bitten into your veins. I don't, and I won't relate. But I think to some, it's too late.
So I just thought this was the most amazing video I'd ever seen when I first saw it. And meeting with Ulysses, we were talking. I said, "So where has it been exhibited?" And he said, "Well, it hasn't. It hasn't been in an exhibition before." So it actually had its world premiere, I guess, in an exhibition in 2008. And I guess that was my first mini revelation that when you're doing a historical show, that doesn't mean everything in it needs to have had a history already, at least in terms of public exhibition, that there's a kind of correction, I guess, in a way you can make. I'd always thought of things and shows needed to have already had something behind them in a way. I was younger at that time, I guess. But anyway, California Video, I'll walk you through it just a little bit. The idea behind the show was to look at the history of video art in Northern and Southern California, and sort of side by side, North and South, and then side by side, single channel video and video installation, trying to sort of mix them together, physically in a space at the same time, as well as some works that might have sort of semi-sculptural components. And it did continue up to the present. So even with the recent work, trying to mix installation and single channel work together. The catalog and sort of the main methodology for doing this exhibition was through interviewing artists. And then most artists had their interview printed in the catalog. So here we're looking at Ulysses' pages in the book. The second revelation in doing this exhibition was when interviewing a lot of the female artists in the exhibition, there was this thing that kept coming up over and over again, where the artists would say that, no matter what type of work they made, when it came to big group shows, they all just kept getting crammed into one room altogether. And that would be the feminist gallery, sort of no matter what they were making. And there had been these, cavernous exhibitions happening lately, like the big Los Angeles show that had just happened at the Pompidou. And so at that time, my thinking was, well, I'm doing a big cavernous exhibition. We can put all the men together in a little gallery. And that's what we did with, these were some of the most famous artists in the show, this sort of performative video art, the sort of Bruce Nauman, Paul McCarthy, that kind of narrative that I think quite often when you're looking at the history of video art, I guess if you were in an art history class that did 1 week on video art, they would talk about this type of work usually. That might be the baseline that most people would know. And then in doing that, it opened up all this extra space to tell the story a little differently. So we could start the show with someone like Joanne Kiger. We can have Cynthia Mon, Martha Rosler, Patty Podesta, Susan Mogul, Suzanne Lacey, Nancy Buchanan. That there was this greater space for narrative pieces. Most of these are pieces where people would be saying something, talking to the viewer. And then here, the soundtrack, which was amazing, was really a lot of knocking and grunting and the sort of physical exertion in a way. And we set this, I spent weeks on this room. We actually set it up in a basement room at the Getty. And I would go in and just play with the volume because everything had a headphone, but we also had sound playing from the speakers. And some of them would be turned almost down. Some of them would be turned up a little more. So the third revelation, I think, came around thinking about what to do with massive images. And because I guess by the rubric I'd set, it should go in the opening galleries where people were, by and large, talking in every video. But in Ulysses' interview, there are a couple things he said that stuck with me a lot, and one of them was just saying that at this time, right when he was about to go to grad school, that there were no models for a Black video artist. And I was thinking about that and thinking about that, in fact, everything in this other room was kind of what you were seeing the most. And then I kept thinking about the video itself. I won't, and I don't, relate. And so here's where we put Ulysses, and his monitor had the loudest volume in the whole sort of sonic array, and placed so that when you walked in, he was sort of right on your right, talking to you. And so I guess the third revelation was about how in a group show, you can, the way that you can play the works with each other. And in a way, I felt that this was an opportunity for Ulysses to talk back to this context that was there or not there in front of him. And then to kind of place him in this place in history where I felt he should have been all along. Most people, when they came in, they would get about this far and then stop because the whole thing was a little bit overwhelming. And then I'll end with just one more minute from Massive Images.
You're just a mass of images. You've gotten to know from years and years of TV shows. The hurting thing, the hidden pain was written and bitten into your vein. I don't I won't relate. But I think for some it's too late.
Thanks, everyone.
I think they turn it on. Yeah, it's on.
Hey, everyone. Thank you guys for those presentations. I feel like, I don't know, tonight feels like family or something. We're all just kind of cheering and having fun. And I think it really speaks to just the spirit of Ulysses's work. I think Ulysses over time has really perfected how to address these ongoing issues of racism, how to address these ongoing stereotypes. And there's always this sort of comedic underpinning in his work. Um, and I guess I just want to speak to you both know Ulysses in very different senses. Bridget, obviously, you're a colleague and a fellow professor at UC Irvine. And then Glenn, I'm not entirely sure when you two met, but obviously this show, I think, was really pivotal for Ulysses's career. And as you mentioned before, placing him in that room with those works, I think really did something, because when we think of these sort of origin stories of experimental video art here in the city, there's always a certain group of names, right, that gets named and claimed as that. Meanwhile, Ulysses was also there alongside them, making incredible work. So can you tell me, I guess, Glenn, in putting this show together, at what point did you decide that Ulysses needed to be in this show?
Gosh, it's hard to remember exactly, except that it was definitely early on. I think that for that exhibition, we started by surveying the Long Beach Museum of Art video archive, which had come to the Getty around 2005. I think we started talking about this show around 2006, and it really got going in 2007. But Ulysses' work, not Massive Images, but other pieces by Ulysses were really well represented in the Long Beach archive. And another archive that helped a lot at the Getty was the archive of High Performance magazine, and his work is really represented well there too. And so the first round of research was really just looking at things we had in the collection, and then, but it wasn't a collection exhibition. So then we were, moving around very widely, sort of talking to other people. But just because of Ulysses' work in Long Beach, he definitely would have been in the first round of artists. So I don't remember exactly when we first got in touch. But yeah, certainly from early on. And then also, I think once it got to the point of doing studio visits with other artists, I would always ask other artists to recommend other artists. That's always the best way. And over and over again, people would say, make sure you talk to Ulysses. Yeah. So people knew, even if the work wasn't, always exhibited. And some people knew Massive Images. I mean, I remember, I think Daniel Joseph Martinez told me about Massive Images before I had seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, and Massive Images obviously was in some ways a student work, and Ulysses always talks about Chris Burden in class saying, well, your student work isn't what you're going to be remembered for. And it's really funny because it's quite the opposite. But Bridget, I think obviously, as I mentioned, Ulysses as a colleague, but I think also as someone who's an incredible art historian, I'm really curious how and where you place Ulysses in sort of your scholarship?
Yeah, that's great because part of my whole goal as an art historian and as a person is to constantly expand people's definition of Blackness. Um, and it needs to be capacious because Blackness is everything, right? Blackness eats light, Blackness is all color. Um, and Ulysses is the main sort of impetus for why that has to be. You know, I think everybody's Black is different, and Ulysses is a prime example of that, how you can be so aware of your Blackness and live your life in a way that's unique to you. So you can be an Afro hippie, you know, you can be the first Black video artist, you can cover the Watts Festival, you know, you can make this amazing film, King David, which is still the best film about David Hammons ever. And just have that vision and insight to know to be at the right place in the right time and to use your gifts, even though they haven't been sanctioned by the art world, you know, and just to trust your vision. Like that is, for me, that's how he fits into art history because he expands. I mean, I'll finish my thought. Expands the canon, but he also, I think, is an example of why the canon doesn't make sense. Like, we can't ever have a canon that's going to be comprehensive enough to really show the breadth and expansiveness of who we are. So it's like Ulysses' work just sort of breaks that. And I think also, Ulysses, your work as a professor, I mean, we've shared many students, and it's been great to have your classes because they're like, yeah, I learned about this in Ulysses' class, you know, and it's like, oh, okay, you know, Sun Ra, right? I'm like, right, Sun Ra. You know, they're like, yeah, I heard of him. Ulysses told us. Okay, well, now we're going to bring it in here. We're going to talk about Parliament. We're going to talk about the Black Arts Movement. And, you know, like he provides texture in another space on campus that helps. I think our classes have really complemented each other in a way that's so helpful because sometimes the students think you're making everything up. You know, it's like I won't go on. Well, don't even get me started on examples. Okay, but it's been just helpful to have Ulysses there as a witness and another source of information and someone who, hopefully like myself, really encourages students to trust their own vision and to create a safe space for Black weirdos, right? Because I think both of us fit into that category. Um, so yeah, the expansiveness of Blackness and the creativity to back it up, I think, is how Ulysses fits into art history for me.
I also wanted to talk about design when it comes to a nearly all video exhibition, which I think is just the wildest thing to say. It's just like, why do I hate myself? Like, what am I doing? And Glenn, I wanted to talk through, you know, some of the design elements that I saw, obviously in these images, but in the show, and kind of how you approached a video show of that size, and what were some of the things that you considered throughout that?
Yeah. It's hard. Yeah, that show had more than 30 hours of video in it, and there were visitors who came over and over again and watched everything. Like you will get a small number of those. You know, just try. You want to make it inviting in any way you can. I think for that show, the hardest thing we did. You know, we put the label at the seat, and every monitor had a seat, so you could sit, you could put on headphones. If you think that's gross, you could plug in your own headphones if you wanted to bring them, and move around from station to station. And then when you got to the center of the show, we'd made a study room that was the whole show on individual computers. So if you wanted, you could sit just in one place and watch every single video, including what was going to be in, or what had happened in the public events. You could just sit in one place and watch that, or sort it alphabetically, or sort it by theme. And that helped because people have different ways, some people would rather just kind of, click around or be able to skip forward. And that's really hard to do. That took a lot of production to do that. I've wished I could do it on every single show since, because it matches more with how we might watch video at home. Sometimes we skip, right? We know. And to have that ability to browse. So that was something great, and all of the artists agreed that as long as we kept it in that interface, then we could keep that available just at the Getty in general. So for years, it was still available. It was all done in Flash, so it's not available anymore. But for many, many years, anyone could come and they could, like, the show was sort of still there as it was done. I think you all did a great job with this show, using a lot of tricks we all learned, like switch the equipment, because that'll give a different feeling. The sort of alternating between projection and then smaller things, that shift in scale. Let competing brands work in your favor as a design choice. Every little thing is worth really overthinking, and you can't be too obsessive.
Wow.
Yeah, I to sort of speak to that, but I think also to speak about conservation, because I know that's something Ulysses is always thinking about, and something that luckily I just want to shout out Peter Kirby, um, yeah, he's here, amazing, Peter.
Peter did all the work for California Video too.
See, Peter's
And for
the
the
guy.
Blondell Cummings exhibition that just closed, and for about 500 other shows that have happened.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think having someone like Peter on your team is phenomenal because, Peter has really been a steward actually of Ulysses's work over the years, and has all of the equipment to really move the work from generation to generation, so to speak, through video and finally to digital. And so it was really amazing actually to go, to Peter's studio and to actually, uncover some works that hadn't been digitized before, to bring them in. And it's a serious issue, conservation, when it comes to this type of thing. It's like, how do we preserve these legacies? And so, yeah, I just want to thank you, Peter, for doing that. I mean, the show really would not have been possible without you. So, yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to say one thing. I was sitting next to Ulysses when I showed the mural, the transportation mural. I didn't mention scale. It's 3 stories high. And I just wanted to make sure that that was clear because, when you show things, everything's the same size. But just to give you a sense of the scale that he was working, I just wanted to make sure that I said that.
Yeah, and also there's a story. Carrie James Marshall talks about the first time he saw Ulysses was on that scaffold making that mural before he even met him at Otis. And when he met him, he was like, "Oh, you're the brother on the scaffold." So also just thinking about, how small in some ways these communities were at that time, but, just how beautiful. Yeah. Well, I think it's time that we bring up the man of the hour, Ulysses.
And we're just gonna, we're both gonna open it up to Q&A, but also continue the conversation up here. So if you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand. We have people who are running mics on either side of the stage. Hey, Ulysses.
Hello. After having my career, life, and what have you discussed, what can I say? You've had an opportunity to see the show, I hope. And I hope what you've seen, I've heard some people say they were inspired, and people are talking about the levity that might be involved in looking at my work. It's just doggerel. You know, the thing that I do. And if you've got questions, now's the time to come on with it. Yes, right. We can do this now.
And Ulysses, for those who don't know what doggerel is, because we actually didn't get to that tonight, can you actually explain what that is?
It's an irregular variation on a theme, sometimes in a comedic verse, in irregular measure. And you see that in most of the work. Actually, as you pointed out very succinctly, Glenn, I was doing doggerel in massive images and didn't know it yet. But if you haven't gotten the catalog or the memoir, I come across doggerel in an interview of Marlon Brando when he was in the film Superman playing Superman's father. And the interviewer asks him, "What did you like about your portrayal in the film?" And he goes, he liked those doggerel moments. And I said, "What is doggerel, man?" And in that sense, he's talking about the space in between when there isn't necessarily dialogue and how that space is interpreted. And when I looked it up, the definition, of course, it comes from a theatrical construct in Britain. And the whole thing about an irregular variation on a theme, and I said, wow, that's how we as black people live in America. It's irregular variation. And sometimes it's a comedic verse. And it's an irregular measure. So to that extent, I said, I'm going to adopt this because at a certain point, if you do get a Western art history education, you see the whole history of the European artists who start these particular movements. And I said, it would be interesting if I could do the same. But I'm just going to call mine doggerel. And if those people who want to adopt doggerel, if you're feeling it, you could go for it. And to that extent, that's how doggerel came to be, actually. I actually have a whole recording of my notions on doggerel in a recording I did called Adams B. Doggerel, which was a performance that I did very early on when I got a studio space from Carrie Marshall. I guess I could probably just comment on all the various and different peoples that have performed with me, that have worked with me, which begets my notion of other visions.
Yeah, I'm hoping that you'll talk about the music also. And is there a dog roll aesthetic to your sound?
Well, I don't know about it as an aesthetic, but I'm hoping that there is something to it. I don't. They were playing some earlier, right? Now, I was requesting a tune. I hope they have. Uh, do you think they have it upstairs?
I'll see if they can play it.
Oh,
I'll
okay,
text them.
great. Um, anyway, yeah, back to your question. I don't. I mean, I don't know how to say a sound because we do a lot of different experimental things with the soundtracks. And as you saw the exhibition, you hearing the soundtracks in the exhibition. As a matter of fact, when you walk in, you have the full soundtrack on Dream City, which was one of my early musical band experiences. But you actually see a little bit of the band in the video itself. But I was able to work with different people, and I wanted to work with the various people who I thought needed to be recognized in some capacity or another, because the whole reality of being an artist of color was that we weren't being recognized. I mean, all the time that I did collaborations with Maren Hassinger and Senga Nakuti, we talked about it all the time. Where are the writers? Who's going to write about us? And to that extent, you start to recognize, for all of you who are interested in a life and career in education as an artist, somebody's got to write about you. Because if they don't, you don't exist. And to that extent, that's what I've endured on a whole nother level. I mean, I was fortunate to get my job at UCI, although I was really fortunate to get a job coming out of grad school. At that time, back in those days, this is the end of the 70s, early 80s, that I would graduate from Otis and get a job at UCSD. And the fact that I was following Tony Ramos, who actually I will give him the credit as being probably one of the most earliest video African Americans. And then when I got my job at UCSD, not UCSD, at UCI, I was following Ed Burrell. So just to put the picture in its purpose in a better focus, that way you understand those particular artists, and we're talking about who I had nobody to follow. I saw Ed Burrell's Bodacious Boogarula. And for those people who are familiar with his work in that capacity, I got a hint at that point of seeing that to end up making two-zone transfer. But then somebody else who wasn't recognized here tonight is Eileen Segalov. Because of Eileen's instruction, her work, and her direction and narrative, I followed that particular form of media working with the creation of Two Zone.
Was she at Santa Monica College?
No. She was at Otis.
She was at Otis, okay.
Yeah. So the thing is, Massive Images was a misnomer. It wasn't supposed to be. It was just something that I made up, which, for the whole notion of your imagination, I mean, that's the whole show. It's my imaginations. And to that extent, my studies, because I always I always loved the surrealists and, of course, the Dada. But then there's Gene Youngblood. And see, if you take a class with Gene, you were taken into the future. All of the stuff that he talks about in expanded cinema is happening now. All the stuff that has to do with the future of technology, digital imagery, all of that stuff. So that when you see televiews and he's giving you that production of the speech that he's doing, I invited Gene to come to UCI to give that particular talk. And the notions of what you now all know if you're doing Zoom, green screen, I was using that principle to create the background that you see in televiews. And to that extent, I had my students make up the videos that you see in the background, so that the principle that I was trying to work with, random association, happened in a very magical way, if I can use that term, that when Gene is making certain inferences, a visual of that is showing behind him. You know, just like the weatherman. That's where I got the idea from.
You know, Ulysses,
Oh, there's a
people
question.
have
I'm sorry.
questions out in the audience, so
I'm running off at the mouth. I'm sorry.
there's a woman in the striped shirt on this side. Is there? Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this panel. It's really great to have a whole sense of all of this work together. I had a question for Ulysses. I'm wondering if you could, maybe it's a bit of a leading question. You've mentioned Eileen Siegeloff, you've mentioned Nancy Buchanan, but there's a whole lot of women and feminist artists in particular who really spearheaded video and video-based performance in LA. And I'm wondering if you could just talk about, I guess, your relationship in terms of breaking down ideas of masculinity and whether feminists were influential to you during the 70s and 80s.
Well, this is an interesting question because there was a women's media group that I don't remember the name of that group now, but that did exist back in those days. And as a matter of fact, I used to go to their meetings. And at the same time, I also met a woman who also had influenced me. She was known at that time as Sally Shapiro, but today she goes by her more proper name. She calls herself Celia. But we had some very interesting conversations. As a matter of fact, because of this show, we have reconnected with each other, actually. And Celia sent me to an acting class by telling me that Martin Landau had this acting class and you might want to check it out. And to that extent, from taking that class, I was interested in the theatrical concepts of being on this stage, okay? So in that sense of what you're asking, that was one. Number two, Barbara T. Smith, when I was going to Otis, and she gave a presentation, and I was so inspired by her move to become an artist that she also inspired me to really evaluate whether or not I wanted to do performance art. I mean, you know, Wanda West Coast, anybody here put her? Okay. And Wanda, you know, I lived in Venice and we became good friends actually a little bit before I went to Otis. And then when I went to Otis, I became her TA on a class trip that we took to Europe. And that was very insightful, just because, the really great avant-garde works that we see in textbooks are collected in Europe. And they're in private collections, ladies and gentlemen. So if you don't know the right people, you will never see them live. So to that extent, and when you're talking about influences by women, yes, I had some. I've had a few.
Okay, next question.
First off, Mr. Jenkins, thank you for your life's work and your expression. I personally want to know a little bit more about your experience at Santa Monica College.
Well, that experience was first of all, you get into my bio now. I went to Santa Monica College primarily because I knew I wanted to go to grad school, and I needed to do a little brush up. The brush up was necessary on a certain level because if you do get the manuscript there, I left this mainland and went to Hawaii. If you get the manuscript, you'll find out that I lived in a treehouse with my girlfriend and her baby. This is where the black hippie thing comes in, okay? But, it was back to nature back in those days. And I did it. So...
Santa Monica College.
Yes, I know. I was having a hard time getting out of Hawaii once I went there.
Back to the mainland.
So Santa Monica College, I needed to do what I was telling you in terms of this reacquaintance to the mainland, as has just been said here. But I took the film class, and that class was really amazing because the history of blacks in film is very connected to the way African Americans are portrayed in the visual arts. The whole notion of servitude. You find us painted, but we're usually somebody's servant. And that carries over into film history. So if you've ever seen Birth of a Nation, and I mean Griffith's version, since we had this other black version later on this past few years, but Griffith's version is an encyclopedia of stereotypes, man. Every stereotype that you want to know about black people, in particular, the circumstance of this mulatto chasing this woman that ends up killing herself. I mean, this whole thing is that, I mean, when I scrutinize this now, we're even talking about it, I'm thinking, the love of a black man will make you jump off a cliff? I mean, that's, unfortunately, the theme that he wanted to portray. And then, of course, to the rescue comes the Klan. Reconstruction. And what that represents. I think a lot of people really do still need to consider that. I saw this, as a matter of fact, I saw this billboard with Abraham Lincoln coming up, for those people who live in this neighborhood, coming up Sepulveda, coming north on Sepulveda, ladies and gentlemen, just before you get to Wilshire, there is a billboard that has Abraham Lincoln that says, failed, failed, failed. And I said, what? Oh, I know, Santa Monica. Okay, all right. So you're talking about Griffith, and you see what I'm talking about? But moving back to Santa Monica.
Do you remember who taught that class, Ulysses? It was a black woman who taught
Yeah,
that
yeah.
class?
But what,
I just remember John Sturgeon.
okay, well, I don't remember her name either, but I have some Polaroids that have her name affixed to one of those from those Polaroids. But anyway, make a long story short, Santa Monica was where I got my notions about the fact that the black image, as it was described by my curator as the image problem, was my direction that I got from that film class. Oh, I'll tell you a quick story. We were watching, what's the name of the film now with, no, with Sidney Poitier. Yes, Who's Coming to Dinner? And in terms of watching that film, you get to that place, there's some really incredible moments. I mean, Sidney Poitier is telling his dad about, don't tell me that, you worked all these years and all this stuff. And, and it was certainly a way in which the young generation at that time, which I was a part of, was feeling when it came to addressing the generation gap. And it was interesting how they portrayed it in that film. And we had the opportunity to actually have a question and answer thing like we're having tonight with the director. And the thing that I wanted to ask him, I said, well, if these two people were so in love with each other, why didn't they just elope? I mean, we're rebels. That's the name of our generation. We're going to sit up and play by the rules. And he said the audience wasn't ready for that. And that told me at that point the power of the director and the power that's in the media. And I said, if he couldn't let these two people who he's portraying, who are so crazily in love, Sidney Poitier had to be the super Negro. I mean, he had to have a doctorate degree and all this stuff. And he still couldn't marry this Caucasian young lady? She was a what? A ninny. Oh. That's another movie.
Next question. Should we see if there's any more questions, Ulysses?
Sure. I mean,
Okay.
I hope we got to your answer, brother.
Thank you. Thank you. We have someone right here. Someone you might know.
Ulysses Jerry Allen.
Oh, hey.
I'm so moved by, thank you for the exhibit, and let me see if I can get this. It's just been really incredible to fill in the gaps that I didn't have. So following on this question that Jenny had, you were one of the few men that had the courage to come to the Women's Building and do performance with Sungun.
Yes, I did do one.
and
Boy,
Marin.
they didn't like me there.
Well, there you were. You were courageous
Yes, there I
enough to get
was.
there. But I wanted you to speak to the power of rebels and the alternative art movement and alternative art spaces and do it yourself and making, because as Erin pointed out earlier today in the lecture, you were, and lots of us were doing this kind of thing, but rebels at the time, but you were under the freeways, you were all kinds of spaces, you were like in a chicken factory.
Well, I did do this
but
chicken factory under the...
That power of making it happen regardless. If the dominant culture isn't going to let in, then the power of continuing to make work regardless and figuring out how to show it.
Well, the alternative space movement was something that when I was in grad school, we were being informed about as it was occurring with the beginning of LACE. For those people who are maybe not familiar with the history, the history of lace. Lace was, in a lot of ways, initiated and created with the support and help of grad students from Otis. I mean, to that extent, that's what was the beauty and the magic of Otis. They just kicked you right out into the art world. Well, they did. I mean, and so to that extent, we were involved. See, that's the thing is, you were involved with. Look at, I'm telling you about Barbara T. Smith. I mean, we were involved with the people who were not only emerging, but who have become, regular figures in the community, of the art community. And so having that kind of connection was very instrumental. I mean, when you're talking about the chicken factory, Art Doc, Carl Davis was running. And because Carl invited me, I mean, this is the same thing that happened with Dream City. I mean, Rachel Rosenthal invited me to do that performance. And I was just thinking, you want me, who I didn't think I was much of anything other than an aspiring artist, to open up your performance space, which was at the time the first recognized performance entity for art performance artists. I was so honored. And at the same time, when Carl asked me to do a performance at the Art Doc, and I said, well, wait a minute, man, your Art Doc only has a door that slides up and people drive by. It's a drive-by gallery. So to the similar extent, when we did Without Your Interpretation, which is the title of this exhibition, it was done on the loading dock of this chicken factory. And the owner of the factory told me when I requested some electricity, he says, well, you can get some, but I'm not going to be here on the weekend. So I had one power extension cord. You know those orange ones you guys familiar with? One coming out of the factory onto the loading dock, which had to power the band, their equipment, the video equipment, the sound equipment, the whole thing on one extension cord. So when you talk about working in alternative spaces, you don't know what kind of alternative you're actually asking for. And for the most part, that's how that performance actually occurred. I mean, the other part of it was the fact that when we shot the video, because of the type of video equipment that back in those days, we had to shoot it when it was daylight. I mean, there's certain sections in the video where you see it's dim, but the actual performance was lit by the audience's headlights. And that would give a whole nother look. As a matter of fact, I actually found one of those images when I was doing that look for you. But I figured it's probably too late to send it to you because you know how I get last minute.
It's not too late. I mean, send it to me.
Oh, okay.
This isn't the end of the conversations about your work. I need that in my archive.
I see. See, for the most part, you guys don't know what this has been like.
All right, I think we need another question, Ulysses.
Wait. You're not letting me get to that whole search for ephemera.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions. And just quickly, I wanted to say the 2 performances that Ulysses did in the Women's Building was a performance called Voices, which was led by Maren Hassinger, and another performance called Running Dog, Paper Tiger that was led by Mason, who's here tonight. All right, next question.
Sharice has one right here in the middle.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Hi, thanks for this. It's fantastic. My question is about the relationships between different graduate schools in the Southern California area and how much interaction you had with San Diego or UCLA and back and forth that way.
You mean back when I was going to school?
When you were going to school, but then also when you were beginning to teach.
Well, let me tell you, being in San Diego, you're not going to have a whole lot of communication with LA. I mean, I'll just say this, the distancing between the campuses. I would just say this. When I was teaching at UCSD, since I had just gotten out of graduate school, it was just like a postdoctorate experience. We come to a faculty that has Alan Capro, Eleanor Anton, David Anton, a few other notables. And then you're sitting at a faculty meeting where they're right across the table from you and you're going, oh my God, I just got through studying these people. But those conversations that I had with that faculty is what you have in Consequential Doggerel. Okay. And of course, Dream City. Dream City is a happening in its real life form. And some other things that I was investigating that also occur in that video, but also in the performance. I mean, you do a performance that goes from 6 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock in the morning the next day. And then we almost closed down Rachel Rosenthal's gallery after she's just opening it. Anyway, as far as the schools are concerned, the UC system has a network. These days they have it as something online that you can actually go to various campuses. And these days I think you can actually, if you want to go to a different UC, you can actually register to go to another UC campus. As far as the art schools, that's a whole nother thing. I would be glad to say, because at the time that I got hired at UCI, our faculty was one of the early integrated faculties, and with Catherine Lord as the chair, we actually were one of the first campuses to actually present gender studies. So to that extent, we were also on our campus was one of the early digital departments, which for those people who know what that means, if you're in media, you know, you had to do what you need to do to find some kind of digital support. But, you know, I don't know if I'm really answering your question, to be honest with you, but to the extent of whether or not art schools talk to each other, I think everybody in everybody's own art school is trying to protect their territory.
But Ulysses, you also were at UCLA quite often because you used the editing bays here.
Oh,
and you
that
worked
was
here
just
for a bit.
that was not that often. It was just when I made two-zone transfer. So you want me to tell this story? I might be getting somebody else in trouble here. Gary Lloyd, who used to teach here at UCLA, when I was a grad student, informed me about editing rooms here in the media area. And at that time, I don't know if they still do this. If you were able to get an assignment in one of those editing bays, you had to get the combination to the lock, and they change the lock after every person who finished comes out. So the night that I edited Two Zone Transfer, Gary calls me about 11 o'clock, and he says they're going to change at midnight. Get there so that you can get in there. He gave me the combination number. I get in, and I spend the night in the editing bay editing Two Zone. With people beating on the door. Who are you? What's your student number? What, you know? And I just didn't open the door. I mean, life's an adventure as an artist. And it also is very doggerel.
So I think do we have one more question? Yes, we do. And after this question, please join us outside. We have a little snack, coffee, cookie set up. So please feel free to join us after that. Thank you.
I don't know if there was somebody up there. All right, well, I'll make it really quick. Ulysses, man, I'm one of your students, and
Johnny Coleman, is that you?
And I want to really, really quickly thank you.
Johnny Coleman is in one of my videos, ladies and gentlemen. I just have to say that.
All right.
Self-divination.
Self-divination, yes. All right, but I just want to say, as one of your students, I owe a debt that I can never repay. Man, you have my heart. Your name is spoken. Your work is talked about. Your process, as it's like my foundation, brother. So I'm in your debt, and just so much respect and gratitude, man. So I came to Otis way back in the day, and before I was on a student loan, bruh. So before I started classes at Otis, I came in on work study, and I didn't know the first thing about a wood shop. So they just said, go down the hall and introduce yourself to Ulysses Jenkins. He's in the video studio at the end of the hall, right? And from that very first moment, you took me under your wing, man, and brought me to many of the people that you've been talking about this evening. And just the experience of watching your process and your flow, like the humor, the wit, the intelligence, the creativity, the improvisation, it schooled me and gave me a foundation that I've been working with since I met you for the first time, and all of the people that you brought me to. So much respect, man. But a question is, could you speak a little bit about the notion of improvisation and flow and process, that doggerel, that liminal funk?
Well, yeah, and actually it's funny you say that, because I went to Brazil with this dance group, Bebe Brazil, and was studying candomblé, seeing the African religions practiced in the New World. I've got a question, though. Are you Barbara McCullough?
Everyone's in the house tonight.
Barbara McCullough was one of my early influences when you were asking me about women. And she did a film called Water Rituals. And that particular, and she's a graduate of the film school here at UCLA. That particular ritual that the young lady does was so powerful where she squats and urinates to the earth. And that just really, the whole, in a sense, I thought that was one of the most feminist expressions I had ever seen. And you women might not want me to say that, but that's the way I interpreted it. Because that section of the woman's body making contact with the earth, claiming territory. And anyhow, I had to recognize Barbara. When I kept looking, I said, that looks like Barbara McCullough. And Barbara performed with us as well. So I've got to, other visions, man. Johnny, I don't know who anybody else who here has been performing or worked with me in my work. I know May. There were a lot of people. Is that? May, is that Vinsula sitting next to you? No, I guess not. Is
Vinsula Cara here? No.
No. Okay. Well, if you see my work, you're seeing a large amount of people of color that, like I said, that I thought, especially back in those days, were not getting recognized for the work that he did. I don't even think Todd is here. Todd Gray, who's in Without Your Interpretation. And, of course, the makeup that you see in Without Your Interpretation was done by Patsy Valdez. So there's Osco, as far as well as a lot of the other people that we worked with that are in my works. So, what about improvisation? Oh, the improvisation. It's just the way that we move, ladies and gentlemen. See, the thing that Johnny said, though, is something about the funk. When I went on this trip with Veve Brazil, and they have these African instructors who are teaching the African moves to the dancers, and I went up to this lady who was from the Congo, and I said, "How did you guys get so funky?" And she says, "We are funk." So in that sense, that's the answer to your question, my man. Oh, okay.
That's awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll meet you guys all out front. Thank you so much.
What happened
Thank you.
to my tune?